dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. Yes, I am in fact poorly singing one of the greatest TV theme songs ever made, and so of course it is time to dive into my thoughts on the second season of House of the Dragon. Oh my goodness, we have a lot to discuss for today's video. We're going to be diving into the good, the bad, the meh, everything. And so if that sounds fun to you, then keep on watching. And of course, as per usual, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and make sure you turn on notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. Now without further ado, guys, let's get into this. So for today's video, I think I'm going to dive into my overall thoughts first, and then we're going to get a deep dive into each of the main characters, at least the main characters that had storylines of note, because So first of all, let's dive into the overall thoughts. And first up, I just wanted to preface the whole video by saying that even though season 2 of House of the Dragon had a few disappointments, there were definitely some critiques and some issues with this season, which we'll dive into. I do just want to say that still to this day, the Game of Thrones franchise remains one of the tippity top TV productions that we have airing right now. Like, you can really tell that the Game of Thrones franchise is made of a different sauce. You know, it has that HBO sauce. You can tell from the production value standpoint, and also the actors, the costumes, the hair, the makeup, the production design. You know, this series and this franchise just stands on its own. And oftentimes when we're diving into the good and the bad and the meh, we're mostly comparing it to itself. Like, we're mostly comparing it to season 1 of House of the Dragon, or of course its predecessor, Game of Thrones. Like, people often talk about how, you know, this season compares to the prime Game of Thrones that we had. No one really compares it to other shows or franchises, which just shows that it's in a league of its own. So that's number one, okay? I just want to preface this whole thing because I'm going to have a lot to say, but at number one, we have the fact that this series really is in a league of its own, and even when it's having the worst of days, it's still far better than a lot of television out there. But number two, let's dive into the main critique of this season. Not much happened. Not much happened. Unfortunately, we have yet another case of an incredible series that came right out of the gate, smashing it for its first season, giving us a lackluster second season to follow up. And it's kind of crazy because House of the Dragon isn't even the first series in 2024 to give us a lackluster follow-up after an incredible season of television. We of course have a recent example in The Bear season 3, which gave us two near perfect seasons of television before hitting us with a season 3 that was a bit wonky, that was a bit wavy. And then of course earlier on this year we had another prime example of this trend with Invincible season 2, which dropped its second half of the season in March, and that too ended up being a little bit of a disappointment. And it's very interesting to see this comparison because in all three cases the disappointing seasons were the ones that were kind of setting things up for the future. These were the build-up seasons. These were the anticipation seasons before we're hit with what's to come in the next season. And unfortunately, in all three cases, the current season suffers for it, because even though we can have our expectations high in the sky, you know, awaiting the following season to come out and just blow our minds, in the meantime, we have to deal with a lot of build-up, a lot of exposition, a lot of sitting around and waiting, and it's just not as entertaining or bombastic to watch. In all three cases, I am very much looking forward to seeing what comes afterwards, because now that they have all built the foundations for something juicy, something spicy, something interesting, all they need to do now is stick the landing. And I think many of us passionate viewers will still be tuning in for the follow-up seasons. But now, instead of having the undoubtable, indisputable confidence in the writers that we did leading up to these seasons, we are a little bit more nervous. We're a little bit more trepidatious. But we still have faith, okay? Those of us who are fans still have faith that the writers and producers can pull through. It's just that now we're a little bit more cautious. Another critique that I would have for House of Dragon season 2 would be its treatment of its side characters. I simply do not believe that the side characters are as rich and multifaceted and interesting and diverse as the side characters that we got in the original Game of Thrones series. I mean, if you think of the plethora of side characters that we got in that show that we became just as invested in as the main characters, it's just, you know, mind-boggling the kind of world building that they did in the original series. And of course, you know, they had more seasons and we definitely got more time with the side characters up until the last season. But even at the point of the second and third season of Game of Thrones, I feel like we knew more about these, you know, side characters that surround our main cast. Whereas here, the side characters just do not have distinguishable personalities. They all seem to fit in these boxes, in these categories, that some of which kind of harken back to the characters that we saw in Game of Thrones. I think people have said similar things about Laris, about Mysaria, right? Like you can see echoes of previous characters that we were introduced to in Game of Thrones, but they don't have like defining characteristics in their own right. But I will say, to their credit, there is potential for some of these characters, so I'm not giving up. Like I said, like I'm still looking eagle-eyed to see what they do with some of the characters that they built up for the last 2 seasons. We'll dive into more in a second, but so far it's looking a bit bland. So far it's looking a bit dead, okay? Especially in the case of Rhaenyra's council. Yeah, I can't tell who from whom, what from what. Like, I don't know who these lords are. They don't really have distinguishable personalities to me. I just know that they're a bunch of old grumbling men who don't have faith in her because they're sexist, because they're misogynistic, and they don't believe that a woman can actually rule. That's it. That's all I know about them. But in terms of distinct personality traits, in terms of history, in terms of motives, in terms of world views, I don't know anything. And this sort of thing matters. It really does, because when you get to a moment like we saw in the season finale, where one of the lords who was supposed to be on Rhaenyra's side on her council ends up going to Daemon and offering his hand and his army in faith to Daemon, that moment would have meant so much more, and it could have been built up in a really significant way if we had been able to get into his mind just a little bit more, and if we understood him and knew him as a character on a deeper level in comparison to what we've seen from him in this season, where he's just kind of grumbled and mumbled and complained about Rhaenyra being a woman. Now, my next critique of season 2 would be that House of the Dragon so far is feeling a lot smaller than Game of Thrones. Like, it's starting to feel a little bit small, a little bit cramped. Game of Thrones had such a vastness and like largeness about it. It felt like a whole world. The characters tended to travel a lot more, and you got to experience all of these different cultures, right? Like the Dothraki versus King's Landing versus Highgarden, like all of these different environments felt and looked different, and so that created a much bigger, broader world that we could dive into. Whereas in House of the Dragon, it feels really small because it's mostly constrained to King's Landing, but not even just King's Landing, like one street on King's Landing. Like, they keep showing the same old street in King's Landing, or we're constrained to the walls of the palace, and whilst the palace is cute and grand or whatever, it feels like we're all just kind of cramped in there. We're starting to feel a little bit suffocated. I want to see the world. Like, I want to see what's going on beyond the walls. I'm not stuck like the peasants are. I can get out of here. As a viewer, I don't need to stay within these walls. And so I feel like the show could use a little bit of expansion when it comes to the world building. Now, to be fair, we are starting to see a little bit more of that with Lord Tyland Lannister going out there and getting the army ready in, I think it's Essos that he goes to. And so that kind of breaks us out of King's Landing just a little bit to see more of this world. We also got to look at the Eyrie, although the Eyrie is like, I mean, like its name suggests, it's just an eerie, rocky environment that looks very similar to everywhere else that we go to. It's very similar to Dragonstone, where Rhaenyra is stuck. So yeah, I want to see more diverse environments so that we really feel like it's like a fully fleshed out world. Because so far, the world of House of the Dragon is feeling a lot smaller and more constrained than Game of Thrones ever did. And that's bizarre because it's supposed to be set in the same universe. And similarly to that point, I would say that season 3 absolutely, definitely needs to get these actors outside. It needs to get these actors interacting with the environment, going outside in different places, because all of these mumbled, hushed conversations taking place in these dark halls is getting a little bit old. Like it's getting, like I felt like a lot of the scenes felt really repetitive. It felt like we were moving at snail's pace, and that goes back to what I said about this season being a sort of in-betweener, a precursor before the main event. Hopefully that's the plan. But you can definitely feel that when the characters are stuck in the same old environments, especially in these like dark, you know, haunting halls as they whisper their conversations. It's just a little bit repetitive. Like we need them to go out. We need them to do something crazy, something jazzy. Get on some dragons. Get on some dragons. Okay, because at the moment, you know, as cool as these sets are and the production value is definitely there, but we can't just be having yet another season of this. Like we need to mix it up pronto. And my final general point is a positive one. Okay, I'm not just cussing this show out because I do love it ultimately, but I am so delighted by this cast. I think this cast is brilliant. Yes, I do. Every single member of this cast gives a phenomenal performance, and the fact that I want to see more from them, the fact that I want their characters to be built up, to really dive into these characters, is not a slight on them whatsoever. It's a compliment because it shows just how brilliant they are at playing these characters, and I just wish and hope that the writers make use of them in the best possible way while still driving forward the story of the books. So without further ado, let's dive into our main characters, starting of course with Team Black, where we have Rhaenyra herself. Rhaenyra's slogan for season 2 of House of the Dragon was, "What would you have me do?" What would you have me do? That's literally what she kept saying each and every time. And like, yeah, at first I was rolling my eyes, but then I just started bursting out laughing because she literally said that 100 times this season. But oftentimes when she was saying it, she was right. Like she was in a tricky situation. First of all, at the beginning of this season, Rhaenyra suffers horrific loss, which I think is forgotten about far too quickly, because remember, if you cast your minds back to the beginning of season 2 / end of season 1, Rhaenyra not only suffered a stillbirth, which was already traumatic enough, but she also lost one of her children in Lucerys. Lucerys was out there with his baby dragon and his baby self, and he was pummeled by none other than his, is it brother, cousin? Listen, these Targaryen relations, okay? But he was smashed, he was gobbled up to pieces, burnt to ash. And so at the beginning of the season, you see Rhaenyra suffer that great loss, and she actually ends up leaving Dragonstone to search for her son, because she just wants to see him, to see some evidence of what happened to him. So I think the grief and loss that Rhaenyra was suffering at that point was really well demonstrated and represented, although again the stillbirth thing was kind of left to the side, but I do still think that, you know, that was a good representation of how that emotionally affected her. And of course her stupid council populated by men, they were like, oh, she's overreacting, oh, she needs to be calm, oh, she needs to be the queen that we expect her to be. And so she wasn't allowed to be a grieving mother for too long because they wanted her her to snap out of it. But obviously she had suffered a great loss, and it was something that was emotionally affecting her at the beginning. And I would have liked to have seen that continue on throughout the season. Even if she didn't burst into tears in front of the council or anything like that, because she has to remain composed as the queen. But even in the private moments, if we just saw signs of her still thinking about her son and her stillborn child, like, I think that would be a bit more of a realistic journey for her mourning. But back to Rhaenyra's slogan of "what would you have me do?" That all came from the tricky situation that she was in, because she was stuck in Dragonstone. She really couldn't move, she couldn't leave, although could she? We'll talk about it. But she was stuck because even though she had all of these men, you know, going out there to defend her and, you know, getting these armies together for this upcoming war, she herself wasn't allowed to leave because she was the prize. Like, she is the queen, and so she can't put herself in jeopardy because she is literally what they are fighting for. But she is a dragon rider, and she itches, she yearns to go on her dragon and assert her throne herself. But that's not the wisest political move, and so she basically has to stay put. And she has many of these discussions with her council and with Jace, who has kind of become her right-hand man, especially for this season when her husband is absent. Okay, more on that later. And so yes, Rhaenyra is in a tricky situation, stuck between a rock and a dragonstone. And so the biggest storyline that Rhaenyra goes through in season 2 is the search for dragon riders, and this takes place after the death of Rhaenys. Oh, Rhaenys! R.I.P. Rhaenys. Okay, she will be missed. She was missed. She was missed for the second half of this season. Let me tell you, it was painful without her. But yes, Rhaenys ends up dying alongside her gorgeous dragon Meleys, her old girl. They end up dying during, I think it's called the Battle of Blood and Cheese or something. But they end up tragically passing away, and that combined with the loss of Lucerys and his dragon means that Rhaenyra is very quickly running out of dragon riders, and it's getting uncomfortably close, especially considering how huge and terrifying and humongous Rhaegar is. And so she is looking for new dragon riders to support her and to ride on her behalf. And Jace comes up with a genius idea of expanding their search beyond just their close relatives. And so Jace is like, let's take a look at all of these old musty books, like these musty dusty books and scrolls, and let's see if there are any family or distant relatives that can potentially step in as dragon riders. So long as they have that Targaryen blood, it should be cool, it should be Gucci. Now, there are definitely risks to this method. For one, having a bunch of really valuable lords trying out to be a dragon rider is risky as hell, because it often leads to them dying, as we saw. But also, number two, you know, when you give someone a dragon, you give someone the honor and privilege of being able to ride a dragon, if it is in fact successful, and then you're making them very powerful. You're making them very powerful. Ooh! And so Rhaenyra has to kind of weigh these options and the pros and cons, but ultimately it doesn't change the fact that she needs dragon riders. I mean, she has 2 dragons down there in the keep doing nothing at all, like literally not doing anything to earn their keep, and so she's got to put them to work. These are formidable creatures. And so first up, she gets this lord who is distantly related to her. I can't remember what house he's from, but he ends up going to the dragon riding trials, okay, but he doesn't make it out of there. No, he doesn't. The dragon doesn't like him and he gets rejected. But then you have Mysaria, who is Rhaenyra's new bestie. She whispers in her ear and says, perhaps you should look beyond just the official family bloodline. You know, perhaps you should look beyond the lords and the ladies that are documented in your scrolls and books and take a look beneath the sheets. I think it's something that she said. To the bastards! To the bastards we go! Let's create an army of bastards. And so Rhaenyra and Mysaria get out all of these boats out to these messages searching for these bastards, these Targaryen bastards who have the blood, even if they don't have the social standing. And because people are so desperate and hungry and tired and impoverished, they're like, I will try anything, I will do anything to get myself and my family out of this situation. If it means having to ride a dragon, oh please, yes please. And so they end up going to Dragonstone, and there's a second round of the dragon riding trials and that ends up being even bloodier than the first round. We did get 2 successes with Hugh the blacksmith notably claiming the Bronze Fury Vermithor in what was undoubtedly one of the best scenes in the entire season, maybe even the entire series. Okay, that was an incredible moment. And then we had Ulf the drunkard, who we sometimes visit in the pub, okay, when they have those little cut scenes, but he actually ends up being a Targaryen bastard, as he's always claimed, and he stumbles into Silverwing, who takes pity on him. She took pity on him. She's like, oh, you poor dum-dum here, let me give you my wing. And so they end up being formidable allies for Rhaenyra's army. But this does still pose some issues, as we saw in the season finale, where Ulf is feeding himself just a little bit too much. Ulf needs to sit down with his feet on the ground, because he was just getting on my last nerve. And I didn't remember him being that annoying when he was just like some random character in the pub talking mess. But now that he's gotten a taste of power, he's talking back a little bit too much. He's being a bit rude and disrespectful to Jace, and Jace does not like that man. Like, give Jace a reason to take him down, and he will. He absolutely will. But yeah, it was pretty tough to watch Ulf disrespect this gift that Rhaenyra has given him. He's a freaking dragon rider, and he doesn't know how to comport himself. Like, where is the decorum? How embarrassing. Yeah, he's embarrassing his whole community of King's Landing, okay? But having these new dragon riders in Ulf, and also Hugh, and of course Adam, whose dragon sea smoke found him, okay, it wasn't the other way around, that makes for a really powerful group to back Rhaenyra up. And so when it comes to arms, when it comes to weapons, she's definitely on the up. And soon she'll be even more so, because you have baby Rhaenyra. Baby Rhaenyra, who's been running around the Eyrie looking for Sheep Stealer, and it seems like we're on the brink of getting yet another dragon rider for the team. I am annoyed that we didn't get the scene in this season. I don't know why they're dragging it out. Like, not much happened in the season finale to begin with, so at least they could have given us that, because poor Rhaenyra had barely a storyline this season. All she did was take them kids to the Eyrie, and then she got a bit bored, even though it seemed like a pretty chill place to be, but she got a bit bored, and then she ended up ditching them kids. She ditched their kids and then ran after Sheep Stealer. That's literally all that she did throughout the entire season. So she was a very underused character, and I feel like at the very least they could have given her that satisfying ending to that chapter where she finally claimed Sheep Stealer on screen. But if they have to drag it out, at least give us the scene in the very first episode, because if they do a time jump and she's already swooping and swirling and riding Sheep Stealer in the next season, I'm gonna be pissed. But overall, when it comes to Queen Rhaenyra, even though I said that I was a little bit bored by the repetitive conversations taking place in candlelit rooms, I do think that Emma Darcy absolutely nailed it with all of the dialogue that they were given, and I do think that those scenes enrich the character and allow us to get deeper into her kind of thoughts and motivations and worries in that moment. So I actually think it works for Rhaenyra, but at this point I do want her, you know, going out there riding the dragon, doing something, because we can't go through another season of this. But she had many notable interactions this season. Some highlights included all of her conversations with Jace. I thought they were great together. I don't really get mother and son, I get sister and brother from them. And it makes sense because she had her kids really young, so like I don't think it's that off-putting, but they do have a really great familial bond, and I love the conversations that they have with one another. The fact that she told Jace about the Song of Ice and Fire, and she really is trying to prepare him for kinghood, and the fact that Jace is confident enough now to start challenging his mother. I love all of that. So I can't wait to see more from them, because I think it's one of the most like natural familial familial bonds that we have on the show. Another standout interaction was, of course, between Alicent and Rhaenyra. The two interactions that we got were the first time around, Rhaenyra ends up going to Alicent as she manages to sneak into King's Landing wearing the outfit that Hannah Waddingham had in the original Game of Thrones series, the Shame Woman. Yeah, that was iconic. But, you know, they kind of discuss the Song of Ice and Fire there. And it's during this scene that Alicent finally realizes her mistake, okay, the mistake that's about to cost thousands upon thousands of people's their lives, but she finally realizes her mistake, that Viserys actually never intended for Aegon to be the ruler, but instead stood firm on Rhaenyra being his heir. But unfortunately, because Alicent is stubborn and embarrassed and too proud, she's not going to go out there and be like, oh, I made a mistake, guys, because, like, first of all, that would be humiliating. That would be absolutely humiliating, but also it's too late. Everyone is way too far gone. The propaganda has already propaganded, and so there's nothing you could do now to stop this war. I mean, as it's mentioned in the show, it doesn't matter who started it. People will forget. The books will forget, as Renée said. But at this point, it's just about minimizing the collateral damage of the war, and that's something that Rhaenyra takes on and tries to stay true to. Now, the second conversation that she has with Alicent is very different, with Alicent being truly and formally humbled because she's been nothing but disrespected by her own council and her own children. And so after she had that moment where she could discover herself in the forest, as she comes running back to Rhaenyra being like, listen, what can I do to sort this out? Because we can't go on like this, or like we can't. They're trying to ask my daughter to fight, like to be a dragon rider. She can't do that. She's not up for that. I need to get Helena out of there. And so what can I do? And Rhaenyra's like, girl, like, please, are you serious? Like, you caused all of this mess. This all started because of you and your dumbass misunderstanding. And now you want to stand there and be like, oh, what can I do to fix this? As long as it doesn't cost me too much. Like, bitch, no. Absolutely not. If you want to actually fix the situation, you're going to have to pay a hefty price indeed. And it will mean a son for a son. Unfortunately, like, Aegon has got to go. Because how can Rhaenyra feasibly be recognized as queen when you have Aegon out there somewhere sitting around in some wooden chair? Like, absolutely not. He will pose a threat to her crown for as long as he lives, and so she has to wipe him out immediately. That's the only way that this could work. And so you have a teary-eyed Alicent who finally comes to terms with this. She finally nods her head and admits defeat. And so yeah, it looks like we have a path forward, but of course this is Game of Thrones, so nothing is as easy as it seems. Okay, so now finally we move on from Rhaenyra and we're going to dive into Daemon. There's not much to say here other than I was bored. I was bored. I feel like they took an entire season to get Daemon to a point where really he should have been there by episode 2. Yeah, he should have been there by episode 2 of season 2. I don't see why we need to have all of those scenes of him running around Harrenhal, having all these hallucinations. I know that some people appreciated the deep dive into, you know, Daemon's change in position, him admitting that he's not right for the throne, and all these people in his life, past and present, coming to him, showing him these things about himself and also about the bigger picture, right? We even got the Song of Ice and Fire play out right before his eyes, and the prince that was promised and all of that. By the way, that was Dany. That was Daenerys. Apparently, according to this episode, Daenerys Targaryen was the prince that was Listen, my reaction to this is just okay, but it doesn't change anything. Like, it doesn't change the fact that we got the ending that we got in season 8. So, like, I couldn't even be happy. I couldn't even celebrate, because what does it change? Nothing. It changes absolutely nothing. If only it would change everything, but it doesn't. And so, yeah, it just made me even more bitter to see that, the fact that she was the prince that was But anywho, as enlightening and fascinating and disturbing as these visions were, I was pretty over the whole Daemon storyline for season 2. Like, I just didn't feel like it needed all 8 episodes of the season. Like, I really feel like we could have wrapped this up much earlier. We did get some really cool characters along the way, like for instance Sir Simon. Sir Simon Strong is an icon. He is a legend. Like, when I'm talking about side characters that I would like to see carry a whole episode, perhaps not a whole season, but I was really invested in, yeah, Sir Simon is definitely one of them. I feel like with a little bit more writing, a little bit more tweaking, we can really get a formidable character in Sir Simon. But what I saw in season 2 was definitely compelling, and I just think the actor just sold it so much that he kind of elevated the bare bones material that he was given. But the fact that he kept giving Daemon sass every time he referred to himself as Your Grace, the king consort, whatever new title he created for himself, and Sir Simon was like, King consort indeed. Putting him in his place each and every day. Like, the dreams and visions and nightmares got Daemon in the night, but Sir Simon was there in the day, in the broad daylight, keeping him in check. So love that for him. And speaking of keeping Daemon in check, you had the Tully boy. You had, I can't remember his first name, but the Tully, the new Lord Tully. Yeah, he was an icon. He was a legend as well. Like, I love these characters that just like bounce back at Daemon and put him in his place, because we need someone to do that. Unfortunately, Rhaenyra is halfway across the world, and so we need someone else to step in her place. And lastly, on Daemon's storyline, I just want to give it up for Caraxes. I just want to give it up for Caraxes, because my poor boy has been sitting there for all 8 episodes, and you know he is bored as hell with Harrenhal. He doesn't have any friends. He doesn't even have his favorite food. Daemon's saying that pig is his favorite, but I doubt it. I think Daemon's lying. I think sheep is his favorite. But my poor boy Caraxes, he was just sitting there like, oh. And every time Daemon left the castle, you would just see Caraxes' head popping up like, is it time to go, Dad? And Daemon's like, no, like he's busy hallucinating somewhere. And Caraxes is like, when is it time to go? Then in the last episode, you had Rhaenyra and Adam with Cyrax and Sea Smoke, and they're coming in, they're swooping into Harrenhal, and you just see Caraxes like, yes! My friends! Like, you just see him calling out to his best buddies and his wife, and yeah, he was really excited to see someone, anyone that he recognizes, because my poor boy was just bored as hell over there. So I'm very happy for him. He'll be joining the rest of the gang soon, and he'll even find himself with more friends very soon. So yeah, give it up for Caraxes. You only had to make it through season 2, okay, but it's coming up now. And lastly, from Team Black, you have Jace, who, as I mentioned, he has played a very integral part in counseling his mother. He's been her right-hand man throughout the season, the only person that she can really trust. And I think if there is one benefit of Daemon getting the hell out of Dragonstone and making his way over to Harrenhal for the whole season, it would be that it did leave an opening for Jace to have more of these quiet moments with his mother. Now, Jace has this kind of inner conflict about him, because for his whole life, people have known that he is a bastard. Like, people have known that he is actually the son of Lord Strong. I can't remember his first name. I can't remember any of these guys. It's such a struggle to keep these names in check, okay? But Lord Strong, the guy that was the knight that was with Rhaenyra, yeah, you know the one with the dark hair. The one with the dark hair, he seemed like a nice guy, and so of course he ended up getting killed in the horrible way. Yeah, that guy. Everyone knows that that is Jace and Lucerys's father, and so this is something that he's had to work through his entire life. But on top of that, you also have the recent development of these dragon riders who aren't even of noble birth, and it's really giving Jace this sort of identity crisis, because what's the difference between him, a bastard himself, versus these other Targaryen bastards? And so that's kind of something that he has to deal with. And I must say, before the season finale, I was a bit like, Jace, it's okay, love, like, you're gonna be fine, like, like, it's okay. I mean, all of this is kind of rooted in classism anyways. Like, neither of these parties are actually down with the people, down with the townsfolk. They're out for themselves, pretty much. Even if Rhaenyra will send out food and make a couple of tiny gestures here and there to win the people's favor, she's not doing it out of selflessness and out of worry for her people. She's doing it as a tactical sort of maneuver, and with the advice of Mz Zarya, who is down with the people. And so these people are all classist, okay? They don't really care for the poories. And so before the season finale, Jace really did come across as pretty entitled. It's understandable considering his upbringing and the fact that he is going to be the heir to his mother's throne. But still, it's a bit like, okay, love, like, relax. You're still rich. Like, you're still very fortunate. But the season finale gave us one of the most infuriating scenes ever, with Ulf putting his feet on the table. And then he was rude as hell during dinner, and I was like, oh, actually, we need to do something about that guy. Yeah, we need to do something about that guy. Now, I still haven't turned on Hugh. I think Hugh is pretty decent, although I am aware of some spoilers, unfortunately, because social media won't shut up about the spoilers, but I have been spoiled as to what happens. But so far, when it comes to the show, Hugh is still decent, and he has a lot more manners than Ulf does. And Adam is just like, he's just an angel. I love Adam. Okay, look at the smile on my face. Adam is a babe. Adam is a doll. So he will always be number one of the non-Targaryen proper dragon riders. But the season finale also gave us a really touching moment between Jace and Baela, who are of course betrothed. The series will have you forget, but they are betrothed, and they have been since they were kids. But you know, Baela kind of comforts him, and she's like, listen, like, you're still the heir to the throne, like, act like it, show these people what you're made of. And they're going to get the opportunity to do so very quickly. But that was a really nice moment, and I wish that the series would lean into this relationship a little bit more. Perhaps we're going to get that more in seasons 3 and 4, but I need to see more of these two together because they're the only sane couple on the show. They're still distant relatives, like I can't remember how. They're still cousins or something, but out of all of the crazy cracked up relationships that we have on this show, they're the like purest and nicest and the ones that I actually root for the most. So I'm going to need to see a little bit more romantic chemistry, but also just more scenes with them together because they're a riot. All right, so now we turn to Team Green, and honestly, there's not much for me to say other than they're floundering. Like, they are absolutely floundering. We'll whip through them really quickly because I've already been talking for an hour. But first up, you have Aegon, who's been made king, and in the first half of the season, we see him just kind of slouching on his throne, doing the bare minimum. But at the very least, Aegon has some semblance of, if not care, then vague interest into what's going on with his people. He's like, oh man, like, seems like people are really dying of poverty over there. Someone should do something about that. That's crazy. And everyone will be like, sir, that's your job. Like, you're the one that needs to. Although they don't actually want him to do anything, but he does have a yearning to like be useful. So that's the very least that I can say about Aegon. Otherwise, he's a terrible, crappy person, just like the rest of them. Terrible, crappy person, rapist, mind you. Terrible, crappy person. So he sucks. Unfortunately, as bad as Aegon is already, we actually end up getting downgraded even further when Aemon takes over as the Prince Regent, the illegal, the illegal Prince Regent who tried to kill his brother on the battlefield, but ended up coming out victorious because he saved people, even though who did he actually save? Please. But yeah, Aemon takes over and just makes things 1,000 times worse somehow. And at first it seemed like Aemon could be a good substitute because he seemed sharper and smarter, and he definitely has decent battle strategy, and so we were like, okay, maybe Aemon would be the better of the two. Mind you, they're both bad. Mind you, they're both filthy, horrible human beings, but maybe Aemon could like do something? I don't know. But this guy is just the worst. Like, he's even worse than his brother. He does not care about the town folk, the small folk at all. He has them locked up like King's Landing is a cage, all for his own convenience, in order to thwart off any threats to his throne. And so people are just in there just kind of baking with anger and starvation and poverty, and it's gonna break out into a riot somehow. I just know it. But Aemon doesn't care, because he's just livid and furious that Rhaenyra is building up a formidable army against the Greens, and he's still butthurt about what happened in episode 7, where he just saw just the mere sight of Rhaenyra surrounded by those dragons had him hauling ass out of there, hauling ass out of Dragonstone, but to the point that he burned down an entire village. Like, him and Rhaegar just went mad on a village, and hundreds of people have died. So Aemon is literally the worst of the bunch, and that's saying something considering they're all rotten fruit. But you know what they say, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, and so here you have Alicent. Here you have Alicent, and this season she got the lesson of a lifetime, yeah, because despite the fact that she was the architect of this whole coup, despite the fact that she was the one that pushed for Aegon to be made king because of her misunderstanding of Viserys's intentions when he was on his deathbed, despite the fact that she really thought she could maneuver her way into a position of power that has never been seen by any other woman because of her faith and loyalty and service that she's committed herself to for decades under Viserys. Despite all of that, all of her best efforts, she came out of this season with empty hands, nothing to show for her. Nothing to show for anything, and honestly I love it. Honestly, I ate that up, because it's exactly what she deserves. It's exactly what she who do you think you are? And the series casts so many comparisons between Rhaenyra and Alicent throughout the season, but you see that despite the fact that they're on opposite sides of this war, you see that their male council members treat them exactly the same. Like, they have the same prejudices and the same reluctance to listen to a woman exhibited on both sides of the war. And it's crazy because here you have Rhaenyra, who is the queen. You know, she has claimed this throne for her own, and so you would expect her to be respected and revered in the way that a king would be. But of course, misogyny still exists. I mean, hello, her auntie is the queen that never was, to the point where at the very end you even see one of her lords willing to betray her. But on the flip side, you have Alicent, who may have held down the fort when Viserys was too sick to rule, but now all of her best efforts have been completely forgotten about and wiped away from the history books, as she deserves, okay? And so now she's just found herself, like I said, you know, completely empty with nothing to show for her efforts. So overall, it seems like Team Black has won this round. I mean, the Blacks are over here. They have 1,000,000 dragons and dragon riders. They have armies being assembled in their name. Like, everything is fine and dandy. Even Daemon has gotten on board. Like, Daemon has finally gotten in order. He's bent the knee, and so he knows his place now in the history book. So you would think that it would be an easy win for Team Black, but this is the Game of Thrones. Nothing is ever easy, and so I'm looking forward to seeing what season 3 has in store for us. I'm sure there will be a lot of twists and turns, and apparently a lot more war and battles and dragons are coming, and so I'm excited for all of that. But I do think that it is a shame that season 2 had to pay the price. Speaking of sacrifices, they had to sacrifice season 2 to build up a lot of this tension and the themes and the storylines that will hopefully be fully fleshed out in season 3. But I can't give my rating for season 2 based off of what could be the potential of season 3. And so with that in mind, I'm going to be giving season 2 of House of the Dragon a 7.5 out of 10. So that's it from me, guys. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on House of the Dragon Season 2, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of this season down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!